Play for you a clip from MSNBC, which discussed Justice Scalia's comments regarding affirmative action. In my mind, based on his comments, his vote is going to be against affirmative action. The comments he took, which were not attributed directly to him, but from a brief from two people that are issuing a controversial opinion or ideology regarding what they call a mismatch rule. But I'm going to play the video and then make a commentary at the end.
The Supreme Court has released audio of this week's key affirmative action case arguments involving the University of Texas. It gives us a chance to hear exactly what Justice Scalia said that has caused some controversy this week. We'll dissect it with NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams, also with us MSNBC's Steve Kornacki and Ari Melber. But let's start with Pete Williams. He's been following the story closely. Pete?
Okay, Kate, first of all, a couple of notes. Number one, the Supreme Court releases the audio in all the argued cases every Friday, so this is not unusual that they've released the audio. But here's the context. This is a challenge to affirmative action at the University of Texas at Austin. The school has a somewhat unusual program. It admits roughly the top 10% of any high school graduate academically in the state, and then that gets them about 3/4 of the incoming freshmen. For the rest of the 1%, the quarter of the class, they use race as one factor in trying to get more diversity, what they call holistic review of the students. Justice Scalia said toward the end of the argument in a colloquy with the university's lawyer, he asked whether using affirmative action actually might do a disservice to some minority students. Here's what he said.
There are those who contend that it does not benefit African Americans to get them into the University of Texas where they do not do well, as opposed to having them go to a less advanced school, a slower track school where they do well. One of the briefs pointed out that most of the black scientists in this country don't come from schools like the University of Texas. So this court from lesser schools where they do not feel that they're being pushed ahead in classes that are too fast for them.
And in fact, Kate, there was a friend of court brief submitted. It was submitted actually on behalf of neither side in this case, but pointing out research that two scholars say shows that students who come from schools where they're less academically prepared are constantly behind at the university, at elite universities, and when they're in minorities, they feel that they're isolated and they just don't do well, and they might do better to go to a school that didn't have as high an academic standard where they could maybe stand out a little more. So he was referring to a brief. It has been a very controversial comment, and a lot of people have said they thought that he was being racist. But that's where he was coming from. Now, this case was just argued, and the decision isn't going to come until late June. There was 8 justices that heard the case. Justice Elena Kagan sat it out, so it's just 8 justices that will hear it. It takes 5 to win. It does seem fairly clear, though, based on his comments on Wednesday and his votes in past cases, that Justice Scalia will vote against the university case.
All right, Pete Williams, thanks so much. Let's turn now to Ari Melber. He's also been following it, and Steve Kornacki, our chief legal correspondent and host, Steve, here in the newsroom. So I'm going to start with Ari. So you just heard Pete Williams describe what was said. Obviously, some have taken real offense to his comments. What's the context? Why did he raise the question?
Yeah, this has set off, obviously, a lot of controversy, but what the justice is basically doing there is posing a question based on briefs that have been submitted. 2 scholars submitted a brief putting forward that theory, the so-called mismatch theory that our own Pete Williams was just discussing. And so what the justice is doing is asking about that. We've heard this argument. What do you think of it? Now, by the end of his comments, people said they felt like, and you can hear it, we just played it in his voice, that maybe he was endorsing it. But ultimately, Justice justices and judges have to be free to ask these questions as they evaluate these cases. I think there's a lot more controversy in things Justice Scalia has written and held on the court than this question, which ultimately legally doesn't tell you his answer.
But politically speaking, it's gotten, it's fair to say, quite a bit of attention.
Yeah, absolutely, and particularly among Democrats, particularly on the left. You know, Scalia, a conservative justice, a Reagan appointee. Some Democrats, most notably Harry Reid, wasting no opportunity here to go after Scalia. The kind of fact, I think we can play what Reid had to say.
These ideas that he pronounced yesterday are racist in application, if not intent. I don't know about his intent, but it is deeply disturbing to hear a Supreme Court justice endorse racist ideas from the bench, the nation's highest court.
And you know, Kate, when you look at the politics of this, specifically this question of considering race when it comes to college admissions, public opinion has actually been very steady and very one-sided on this through the years. The most recent Gallup poll on this, it goes back a couple years to the last time this issue really kind of reared its head, but 67% of Americans said in this poll that merit alone should be considered for college admission. 28% said race should be a consideration. So politically, it's been a one-sided issue, but the one thing I qualify that with is when you also ask just a question about affirmative action, do you support the idea of affirmative action for racial minorities? There's also majority support for that. So people like the idea of affirmative action, but they don't seem to like it being applied like this to college admissions.
And you and I were talking about this downstairs, Ari, before we came on TV, about the fact that these are jobs for life. So if the politicians don't like what Antonin Scalia said, it's sort of too bad. He's still staying.
Right, they have life tenure, and they're basically saying whether something can be taken off the table or not. In other words, there's a policy debate. The only question for the court is whether it is constitutional to consider diversity in these programs. Previously, they've held yes. This time, though, it's going to be closer, partly because Alana Kagan is not going to be able to rule because she worked for President Obama on this. The last thing I note that I've mentioned is, you know who else thinks affirmative action is a good idea? The U.S. military. They've gone so far as to issue friend of the court briefs saying, we want to be able to consider diversity, gender, race, when we build up our officer corps and our leadership. We think it helps the national security of the United States, and we want leadership that looks like America. That's what a lot of schools say. That's what a lot of Fortune 100 companies say. Of course, businesses are free to do what they want regardless of what happens in this ruling, but public universities, the military, government programs, this could have wide-ranging effects, and that goes beyond Justice Scalia's question and goes to his answer. How is the court going to answer this controversy this summer?
And we don't have any clue, based on the arguments the other day, which way they're headed, do we?
We don't. I mean, a lot of people were skeptical last time because they'd already affirmed affirmative action in the 2003 Grutter case that relates to Michigan. Then they took the Texas case once, narrowed it, but sent it back down. So people felt like affirmative action was hanging by a thread. And now, and this is unusual, here they are taking it a third time. So a lot of folks view that negatively. If it was working okay in their view, in the view of those justices, they would probably leave it alone. A lot of concern about that, but you just can't predict what the court's going to do.
And all coming in the context of a massive presidential election.
Yeah, and in fact, Ari talks about the 2003 ruling. That also came as the 2004 campaign was getting underway. And what you saw back then when that case was going through the court, you saw every Democrat who was lining up to run for president in 2004 supporting the idea of affirmative action in college admissions. And this is one I expect certainly as this case gains momentum and attention, you'll certainly hear the Democrats coming out and supporting this, not so much on the Republican side.
Steve, Ari, nice to sit with you guys. Appreciate it.
Now, as they stated, this is the third time that this has been back in front of the Supreme Court. And they should have settled this the last time this was up. And this is all because a white girl decided that she was being discriminated against. Not even looking at the fact that there were approximately 100 students with grades below hers that were accepted, but all but 10 of them were white students. So she decides she's going to go after affirmative action instead of going after the entire agenda of the 100 students. So this is a bunch of crap. But again, it's just affirmative action. Which is something that hopefully helps a lot of minority students, not just black students, but minority students. And this girl decides that she wants to exercise her white privilege and try to challenge affirmative action. Hopefully, this will go 4-4, and a 4-4 ruling will not benefit her or change the affirmative action rules.